Welcome to this week's episode of We Got You Covered on RVN TV. I'm your host, Rob Shestack, and each week we come to you and we talk about all things insurance and employee benefits related. And with us today, we have Steve Frankel. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much
coming
for having
today.
me.
Just give you a little bit of background on Steve. Steve has his bachelor's degree in economics from Rutgers University. He is Director of Corporate Services for Farmington Company. Yep. He's been a veteran 35, 40 years in the insurance space.
I don't know about
right?
that.
You don't want to admit that, right?
I'm not sure it's that long, but anyway.
And then another thing that's impressive is from a civic and giving back to the community, you are a program board member of Covenant House of Atlantic City,
Yep.
correct? So what I want to do is I typically start off with some type of statistic, and today we're going to be talking about educating, communicating employee benefits to employees so they have a better understanding. We're going to talk about generation gaps and what's the best way to have employees understand the benefits, because you and I, we're in this business and they even get complicated with all the different regulations and so forth and all the different nomenclatures. So, you know, for us, if it gets confusing sometimes, imagine an employee who knows nothing about insurance.
Exactly.
It's probably, you know, I'm just going to do what I did last year because it's too confusing for me, right? So there was one of the things that we talked about when we were going over today's show is there was a study done. It was a couple of them. One was by Watson Wyatt a few years back.
Right.
And they had two different types of benefit programs. They had one that they consider like a high-end program, low deductibles and so forth. Another one that was a lower end, higher deductibles, co-insurance, more out-of-pocket for the employee. And then they communicated them two ways. The high-end plan, they had no communication and just handed out information to employees. And then the lower end plan, they had a high communication, had group meetings, a lot of materials, education for the employees. And then they did a satisfaction survey, and the higher end plan with no communication, they had a 25.7% employee satisfaction rate, but the plan that had lower benefits, but it was highly communicated, had a 76%. It was almost 3 times the amount. And then when they did it on the other side, even the high-end plan with effective communication had an 83% versus a 76%. So if I'm an employer, I'm saying for a 7% difference and my employees think that the plan is great, why would I want to spend all this money on benefits? And that's really counterproductive to what we do today.
Right.
So first, and we're going to go back to the civic thing. I want you to talk a little bit about the Covenant House at the end of the program. But to start off, tell us a little bit about the Farmington companies and what you do there and help employers to communicate benefits to their employees.
Okay. Farmington is a voluntary benefits enrollment, education, communication organization, and we also have voluntary benefit TPA services, which makes us a little bit unique. We're capable of bringing a best-in-class product to the employees, but the topic for today's show, and I think what's most important, is employees, in my view, need to make an informed decision. So it's fine if somebody says no, but they need to understand what they're saying no to, what the consequences of that no might be, especially when you've got the limited guaranteed issue or something like that. So I think what we do well is we've got a triple threat, if you will. You know, we can go out there on site, on call, online. So we still can put people, you know, feet on the street. We have a call center, we can do it on call, and we have a proprietary enrollment system that we can tie into that we can do it online. But again, the overall, in my opinion, goal is to make sure employees are making good and informed decisions.
So, you know, when we look at employees at an employer, they're all different, right? They have different socioeconomic status. You know, some employees may make 40, 50,000, 35,000 hours a year. Some may make 100, 120. And the way that they buy things may be a little different. Maybe one is a more educated consumer or wants to be a more educated consumer to have their money stretch. And then you have, you know, sex, right? So you have male versus female and gender. You have those that are single, that are married. You have different financial obligations and different ages, right? So if I'm 18 years old, I'm probably not going to buy long-term care insurance. And if I'm 75, I'm probably not going to buy $1 million life insurance policy because at that point, my needs are different, but it's going to be extremely expensive. So knowing that there's different demographics within an employer, how does that affect what you do for these employers? Do you look at them and say, we're going to do different things with different classes of employees?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we do with an account that we have is we bring in, they have a large Haitian population. We have Creole-speaking reps. You know, we make sure that the communications up front are also in a language that they understand. We have Spanish-speaking reps, you know, and there's nuances and differences between Caribbean Spanish, Mexican Spanish, things like that. So you really need to, you know, get a little bit familiar with who you're talking to and make sure that you're communicating in a manner that they're going to understand. So taking into account cultural differences, you know, certain groups may want to cover children for life insurance. To somebody else, that could be considered a bad omen, bad luck. You know, you don't want to get insurance on a child. So knowing some of these things and communicating effectively. There can sometimes be somebody in the organization that doesn't hold a title in the organization, but amongst their group, they have a lot of influence. And sometimes it might make sense to talk to that person first, review the program, show them the value, show them the benefits, so that they can then communicate it to the people who look up to them and trust them to help get the message delivered a little bit more effectively. When it comes to ages and things like that, a lot of conversation about that. Whether or not people want to still see somebody face-to-face. I'd rather get my information on YouTube type delivery. I'd rather not talk to anybody at all. Let me just make up my own mind and things like that. So we have the ability to do everything, but taking a step back and learning a lot about the audience, a lot about the company is the best first step in my opinion.
You know, you bring up something that's interesting. I remember this was years ago. We were doing an enrollment up in New York, and they needed somebody to speak Chinese. So we went out and hired somebody. We went in there, couple-hour presentation, come back to the HR director and said, how'd it go? They said it was great, but they didn't understand a word that you said because you needed to speak Mandarin Chinese.
Right.
So even with Spanish, you have different Tex-Mex, you have Spanish, you have French Creole versus French. So it's really important to understand the client and their demographics to help communicate, right?
100%.
So let's talk about, you know, ages. So in different points in your life, insurance and what you have, especially life insurance. So when early on you have children, you want to have life insurance to cover things like college and your house and so forth. But then as you get older and the kids move out and your house is paid off, your need for life insurance may decrease, but other insurance needs may increase, like critical illness insurance and so forth. So when your counselors sit down with employees, do they tailor the conversation with that employee, knowing that there's different buyers based on their ages or their family status, things of that nature?
Yes, and I think we also do that when we train the representatives. It's all part of the process. If you think about life insurance, which you brought up, there's a bell curve. You know, when they're really very young, there's not much need for much life insurance of any kind. But that's a good time to lock in a permanent life type product because you're never going to get younger, you're never going to get healthier. So you might as well get the rate at a young age and keep it. And, you know, I'm one of those people of the opinion that you're always going to need some life insurance to at least cover final expenses. To your point, you're going to need more at different points in your life, but you're probably always going to need some. And that's where the bell curve comes in. So as you get older and you've got the younger kids and you want to make sure you're protected, you bought a home, you want to make sure that the home is covered in the event of your death, things like that, you have an opportunity in most employers to get supplemental term. And our view is that the permanent voluntary life and the supplemental term life, it's not an or, it's an and. So if somebody were to come down to see a representative and say, you know, I'm in my late 60s, I'm thinking about retiring, offering them supplemental term is probably not in their best interest. On the other hand, if an employee came down and said, I have twins that are both going into college next year, a permanent life solution is not in their best interest. Get as much coverage as you can for that period of time with the term. So you're exactly right. Ages are going to determine needs for the most part. Second, you know, when you want to limit the number of voluntary products that are being offered, you have an accident plan and you have a critical illness plan. Well, again, our feeling is, my feeling is, the accident plan tends to appeal more to a younger audience, or an audience that has younger employees that are playing, and children rather, I'm sorry, that are playing sports and things like that. Whereas you start to get into your 40s and above and you start noticing friends are having cancer or somebody had a heart attack, and you start viewing the critical illness plan a little bit differently. It's also when you're starting to get more tests yourself. So absolutely age is going to play into which products make sense at what point you are in your life.
You know, you brought up a good point. You said you're not going to get any younger and you're not going to get any healthier. So a lot of what you do is explain to an employee, if you buy now, there's no pre-existing condition, right? It's guarantee issue, where part of what Obamacare changed was there was no pre-X clauses in medical plans. But that's not true for life insurance. If you have cancer or you had a heart attack or you're very sick, you're probably not going to get life insurance.
Right.
And if they do offer it to you, it's going to be way too expensive. So buy it early, and as you said, there's different types of life insurance. So not all life insurance will fit the situation, and understanding what those options are, what your counselors help those employees understand.
Yes, and the other thing is even some carriers, if you take the minimal amount available, give you the opportunity to buy up to that guaranteed issue at some point in the future. So that's almost like buying insurance, ensuring your insurability. So you're young, you're healthy. I know you feel you don't need it now. Here's the value of doing it now. Lock in some, and then you'll be able to buy more later. Whereas if your health changed, you wouldn't have that opportunity to get anything.
So I can buy today with the option of buying additional in the future without, even if I'm sick, it does not matter.
Right, because you've locked in the guaranteed issue offer. And again, you know, those underwriting offers, you know, used to be a bit more prevalent. I still think there's some today, though.
Pretty interesting. So let me ask you this real quick. We're going to go to a break in a few minutes. What about generation gaps? So the way that you communicate to somebody who's 60 or 50 or 30 or a millennial or somewhere in between is different, because you're not going to see too many, say, 55, 60-year-olds, you know, sitting there on social media trying to get the information that they want, but a 25-year-old, that's all they do is sit on their phone.
Right.
So how does that work when you sit down and you want to communicate differently with different people?
I still feel that having somebody available makes a lot of sense. Now, if that somebody is going to be live and on site or via the call center, it's going to make a lot of sense. There's also, you know, the misnomer that the younger people are tech savvy and therefore they can go enroll online. Okay, you might be tech savvy, but it doesn't make you benefit savvy. So while you've got the ability to get online and you've got the ability to navigate, what's the difference between these two plans? Why should I be taking this? What's the impact of taking that? A lot of times the plan that's selected is the one that costs the least. But if you're going to have a lot of medical expenses and your co-pays and deductibles and everything else is higher because you took the lowest cost out of your paycheck, at the end of the year, are you paying more money overall? So what's the cost? What's the benefit? People don't always have that opportunity. So like I said, we have the ability to, you know, help design materials. We do like to put things online. There's also videos that are available, PDFs that are available. So the people that do feel comfortable going out and getting their own information, they can. A lot of information that precedes the enrollment. You know, again, by the time open enrollment happens, the word is enrollment. They should be there, you know, ready to enroll. So getting them to that point requires a great deal of education with multiple ways of reaching out to hit all generations.
You know, Steve, it's that time where we have to recognize our sponsors, but when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about generation gaps and some other statistics on communicating employee benefits to an employer's workforce. We'll see you in a few.
I work 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. So when I'm off the clock, I gotta get stuff done. So when I need a snack, I need something healthy, tasty, and easy to eat. Like wonderful pistachios without the shells. They're protein-powered, delicious, and great on the go. And that's perfect for me.
Thanks, Liz.
A woman without a lot of time.
Whether you're a gourmet cook or just want to eat like one, visit Rostelli Market Fresh, your home for the freshest, locally sourced ingredients to please everyone who loves great food. Our organic meats, quality seafood, and free-range poultry are cut fresh to order. Chefs create culinary-inspired prep foods made fresh every day, which pair nicely with our vast selection of fine wines and spirits. Choose from handmade pastas, artisan cheeses, organic produce, and grocery items, all from the finest purveyors. Rostelli Market Fresh, from our family to yours.
RVN TV is a platform for people of any industry to share their story. Over 285,000 viewers are tuning in to RVN TV shows monthly. We guarantee a great experience that you'll be sharing with everyone you know while increasing your personal and company's brand awareness. But what is your brand? According to Forbes, it's a combination of your logo, your product, your design and feel, and your personality. Did you know that aside from being a guest, we offer even more opportunity to boost your brand? Adding your company logo and website on screen during your interview will allow viewers to recognize your brand instantly. Incorporating images and video clips is another great way to showcase your product during your live segment. Let viewers see how good you really are. And most importantly, there's you and your interview. For less than the cost of a newspaper, direct mail, or a magazine ad, you can leave our studio and within 48 hours have a permanent digital copy of your live segment to link to your social media, embed into your company website, or use in email marketing. Investing in your brand is so very important, and we can't wait to have you as a guest.
Covered on RVN TV. My name's Rob Shestack. I'm your host for the show, and we have with us Steve Frankel. And we're talking about communicating and educating employees from an employer perspective on their employee benefits. And right before the break, we were talking about age groups, different family situations. We were talking about generation gaps, millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, and so forth. And one thing that you said, which was interesting, is you said, just because you're tech savvy doesn't mean you're benefit savvy.
Right.
And I think that's a very important takeaway, because I never really thought of it that way. And I know there was a study that AFLAC did a few years back, and they said 56% of the employees that they surveyed said that the mistakes that they made in open enrollment by selecting the wrong benefits or not selecting the right benefits and so forth cost them almost $1,000 a year out of their pocket, because they should have bought this program and they didn't, or they went with the higher deductible plan and they should not have, or they went with the comprehensive plan but spent more on the premiums but never really had any issues from a medical standpoint. So how important, when employee benefits is the second most expensive expense that an employer has. Salary is number one, right? So if I have a group, 100, and I have a really diverse group, what are some of the things that you're going to ask me as an employer to have a better understanding of my workforce and where we should start in educating and communicating them?
Okay. Well, I think let's start with the name of your show. You know, we've got you covered. I think most employers, when they put together a benefits package, are thinking, we've got you covered. But if you look at the umbrella, and we got 6 people in the family, they're not all going to be under the umbrella, right? So they're not necessarily covered. So I think you start with basic census data, you know, married, single, children, you know, et cetera, ages. That's going to help. We talked earlier about, are there different languages that we need to be aware of? You know, what's the culture? You know, a lot of information about the company, where people are, tenure. Are people coming in and leaving? Is there longevity? Are people staying with that employer? Do they trust that employer? And then, of course, you want to find out, you know, shift information, location information. Are they spread out? Are they working multiple shifts? What are their jobs? Because you want to be able to communicate effectively, and an employer also benefits from good communication. You know, we focused mainly on an employee making a good decision, but on the other hand, if an employee doesn't understand the value of these benefits, you know, when they first find out how much their medical insurance really costs?
COBRA.
When they get the COBRA bill, and by then you've lost that employee, so it's a little too late. So there's a win-win in communicating effectively. So you also have to be mindful of not interrupting day-to-day operations. And in my career, I've worked in many, many, many hospitals, and I think that's one of the toughest work environments, because you can't be disruptive there, because it's people's wellness and well-being, and lives are at stake. And you have to be able to communicate effectively, communicate efficiently, help people make good decisions, but also be mindful of what's their daily workflow look like. So that's a little bit more about the company in general. Then, of course, you need a solid understanding of the benefits. You have to be able to, a lot of folks just don't have that much take-home pay, realistically. So in order for somebody to part with whatever little money they have to see the value in paying for this. So a single mom with several kids, and the kids are going to be playing sports, and each year a visit to the emergency room or an urgent care is 3-4 times on average. You need to know what those co-pays are for the emergency room and for the urgent care, so that you can then explain the value of an accident plan. It's not necessarily costing you more money. In theory, this is going to help you prevent what you're paying now. So an understanding of the company, an understanding of the employee, understanding of the benefits, I think is, that's the hat trick right there.
Yeah, a couple $100 for an accident plan versus $2,000 in deductibles is a big difference.
Right, but if they don't understand it, it's just one more thing coming out of my paycheck.
Right.
Or don't I have that accidental death and dismemberment already? Whereas,
Right.
An accident plan's different. It's not the loss of use of an arm, you could just have a broken arm.
Right, and people don't understand the value of insurance until they need it.
Right.
Right? I always say this, if you buy a car and you love it, and what do you tell your friends? Hey, look at the car I bought. You buy a car and you hate it, and what do you say? Look what somebody sold me, right? So employees want to feel comfortable about the decisions that they make, right? They want to be able to go home and saying, I know that I made the right financial decisions, not only from an expense standpoint, but to protect my family. And that's your number one goal, correct?
No, absolutely.
So if I were to say, again, I want to go back to tech savvy is not necessarily benefit savvy. So there was a statistic that the FTC put out that said, when you go and you want to buy a TV, the average person will spend 300 minutes looking at all the different options on what TV I should buy, and it's $500. Yet, benefits can cost you $10,000, $20,000 a year, and they spend less than 20 minutes. There's something not right there. So you're sitting down with me and I'm an employer and I say, listen, I can't afford to take my employees off the assembly line, or I don't want them to spend a half an hour with you, or if they want to do it, they have to do it on their own time. Isn't that really counterproductive of what the value is of their providing their employees and what they want to get out of it?
To some extent, but the employer is the boss, and they have to produce. They have whatever the widgets that they're making or the healthcare they're delivering. That has to happen. So you have to be able to work within that environment. I think examples are good. There's decision support tools, things like that. I think showing people examples of how things work. I think that in the area of voluntary benefits, you don't want to wait to have all the voluntary benefits listed at the bottom or at the back of the book. I think that they could be put into the benefits guides, so that if somebody is looking at all of those deductibles, somebody's going to go in and have a child next year after open enrollment is done and the effective date's different. They know they're going to go into the hospital, explain how the hospital indemnity plan is going to pay when you go in to have that child. Again, examples about the co-pays and the emergency room and urgent care, and then have something about the accident plan right there. Because you can't read through all of those benefit choices, make decisions, and then get to here and say, oh, how could that have helped me, and try and connect the dots like that. Real quick, since you seem to like that story about tech savvy doesn't make you benefit savvy, we had staffed for an enrollment, and we had only decided to put on-site people, representatives, in a warehouse, where the workers, weren't as savvy. There was a lot of language barriers in there as well. And we staffed for the people in that warehouse. But the warehouse was adjacent to corporate, and our lead enroller called and said, we need more staffing here. And I wasn't sure why, and it turned out that a lot of people from corporate heard there was somebody in the warehouse that you could talk to. So people from corporate were coming down, and one of the biggest departments that had people coming in to speak with a representative was IT. And that's where, I firsthand saw you could be real tech savvy, but you don't necessarily understand your benefits.
That's pretty good. So the counselors that you use, they're salaried?
Yes.
So they don't get, if I buy something or don't buy something, I'm there just to help educate and communicate the benefits to an individual.
Right.
If they buy life insurance, I don't get commission.
No.
And I think that's very important because that's not everybody's model in your industry.
Yeah, it's been the way, I've worked since I've basically gotten started. I feel that it's the best thing to do because we know that there's a lot of people that just aren't being seen by insurance agents. They don't make enough money. They never bought a home, so the mortgage list wasn't purchased and then solicited. There's no alumni association. And there's products that you really can't necessarily buy on your own, like the accident plan, the critical illness plan. But almost everybody has had an example of a heart attack, stroke, cancer for a friend, family member, or coworker. When they hear it in those terms and they realize that even with the best medical plan, there's still the indirect expenses, the out-of-pocket cost, the spouse who's not disabled but driving the person who has cancer for their treatments and then losing wages. When they start to understand those things, we know there's going to be participation. There's no need for somebody to have to push to make that clear. And again, if somebody says, no, my goal wasn't an informed decision. Did they know what they could have had? Did they know how this plan could have helped? Did they know what the consequences if they don't enroll at this time?
Yeah, I mean, these are financial protection programs in reality.
Yeah, and they're not all right for everybody.
So what do you see as the top 3 or 4 programs that employees are asking for today?
Well, disability insurance, I think, was number one for a long time. People need their paychecks. A lot of times, especially when somebody's new, they haven't accumulated a lot of, paid time off and sick leave and things like that. So you're so excited to get a job, it's because you need to be employed. So the ability to protect your income is super important. We're starting to see that more and more employers are picking up the cost for that disability insurance. I think today, New Jersey just bumped up their temporary disability benefit. I think that might have gone into effect today or very recently. So it looks like disability is being covered. That's great. So now people can kind of fine tune, where might I become disabled? Where am I more likely to become disabled? And again, for the middle-aged to older type employees, it's that critical illness plan. The cancers, heart attacks, strokes, things like that. There's also a lot of wellness initiatives going on amongst employers, and a lot of these plans will pay a wellness benefit. So if that's coordinated and discussed at the same time. So I would say, number one, if needed, would be disability. Number 2, critical illness. I still feel that there's a need for permanent life insurance. Many employers, provide insurance, but like you said earlier, not many people, not most people are going to die at the job. They're going to hopefully live to retire and then at some point need their life insurance. Well, they don't want to take a chance to necessarily have to convert at what cost. So the ability to know this is what I'm going to pay, this is what I'm going to have, and I can take it with me, for a lot of people makes a lot of sense, peace of mind. And a lot of those life insurance plans now have living benefits. You don't have to die to get value from your product. Should you need care for long-term care type assistance at home in a facility, these plans from your life insurance can pay a benefit.
Yeah, well, that's great information. We only have about 30 seconds to a minute left. 2 things. One, I'm going to have you give your contact information in a second, but what is the number 1 mistake that employers make relative to communicating their benefits?
The number 1 mistake, I think sometimes it just might be that it's kind of just put out there in a booklet, and the booklets have now gone the way of it's just available online. So there's a lot of employees that don't have the ability to get online. We've talked about that. They're not comfortable online. They're really not prepared when time comes. All of a sudden, it's now open enrollment. Here's your window to do it. And they weren't properly educated in advance to make that decision.
I'll just keep what I had last year, and it's
a lot of times that's it, yeah.
So, Steve, if you can provide your contact information to the viewing audience in
Yeah.
case somebody would like to get in contact with you, that would be great.
Sure. Steve Frankel. Email is sfrankel, Frankel, @farmingtonco, farmingtonco.com. Be happy to talk to anybody out there who has any questions, and that would be great.
Great, Steve.
Thanks for the
Thank you
opportunity,
coming on
Rob.
the show.
Appreciate
I
it.
appreciate it. Thank you for allowing me into your homes and businesses this week, and we'll see you next week. And remember, when you have the opportunity, please pay it forward. Have a great weekend.